In 2025, New York City made history. For the first time in its long story of power, diversity, and dreams, the people chose a Muslim mayor, Zohran Mamdani, a son of immigrants, a voice for the forgotten, and a leader whose journey from the crowded streets of Queens to the grand halls of City Hall became a symbol of America's changing soul.
New York City, a city built on migration, ambition, and reinvention. Every street corner carries the sound of a different language. Every skyline tells a story of struggle and success. For centuries, New York has called itself the World City. But behind the lights, the rhythm, and the promise of opportunity, there has always been another truth: the fight for equality, recognition, and representation. In this film, we explored the extraordinary life of Zohran Mamdani, the man who rose from community activism to become New York's first Muslim mayor. His victory was not just political, it was cultural, historical, and deeply personal for millions of people who saw in him a reflection of their own stories. To understand how this moment arrived, we must travel back to the beginning, to his roots, his influences, and the city that shaped him. The story of Zohran Mamdani does not begin in New York. It begins thousands of miles away, in the warm heart of East Africa, in Uganda. Zohran's roots stretch back to a family of Indian origin who lived in Uganda for generations. Like many South Asians in East Africa, his ancestors came as traders, teachers, and workers, building bridges between cultures. But in 1972, under the harsh rule of dictator Idi Amin, thousands of Ugandan Asians were expelled. Families were forced to leave everything behind: their homes, their businesses, their dreams. Among those displaced was Zohran's father, Mahmoud Mamdani, a young Ugandan of Indian descent determined to rebuild his life through knowledge. He would go on to become one of the most respected African scholars of his generation, teaching at Columbia University and shaping debates on race, empire, and decolonization. Zohran's mother, Minnie Bruce Pratt, was an American writer, poet, and activist known for her work on social justice, gender, and equality. Her words carried both compassion and courage. When Zohran was born in 1991, his life was already a crossroads of worlds: African, American, Indian, and Muslim. He was born not only into a family of thinkers and activists, but also into a tradition of questioning injustice. Growing up in Queens, New York, Zohran saw the city from the ground up. He saw diversity, but also division. He saw wealth, but also poverty, rising rents, and people struggling to stay in their neighborhoods. In this melting pot of languages, beliefs, and dreams, a young boy began to ask deep questions. Who gets to belong in America's biggest city? Whose voices are heard and whose are ignored? These questions would shape everything to come. At school, Zohran was known not only for his curiosity, but for his empathy. He wasn't interested in fame or fortune. He was interested in fairness. After finishing high school in Queens, he studied at Bowdoin College in Maine, a small liberal arts institution far from the noise of the city. There, he began to see the power of stories, how politics, history, and economics shaped the lives of ordinary people. He joined campus movements supporting immigrant rights, racial justice, and affordable education. He read about leaders like Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X, and Amilcar Cabral, figures who believed that politics could be a tool for liberation, not just power. After graduation, Zohran returned to New York, not to chase wealth, but to work directly with the people. He became a housing counselor, helping tenants fight unfair evictions in Queens. He He stood beside families who faced losing their homes, translating documents, writing letters, and standing up in court. In those crowded offices and noisy hallways, Zohran learned what many politicians forget, that leadership begins by listening. He also began to see how the system worked and how it often didn't. The rent crisis, the wage gap, the broken promises, all of it pointed to something bigger. New York needed voices who understood life from the bottom up. And soon, that voice would be his. By the late 2010s, New York was changing, and so was its politics. The cost of living was rising, inequality was deepening, and in Queens, working-class families, immigrants, taxi drivers, small business owners felt the weight of an economy that seemed to have forgotten them. It was here that Zohran Mamdani found his purpose. He began to organize with community groups, attending neighborhood meetings, speaking at local rallies, and helping ordinary people understand their rights. He wasn't a celebrity politician. He wasn't backed by corporations or wealthy donors. He was a man with a clipboard, a calm voice, and a promise. Government should work for the people, all people. In 2020, Zohran made a bold decision. He ran for the New York State Assembly, representing District 36, which included parts of Astoria, one of the most diverse neighborhoods in America. At the time, few believed he could win. He was young, progressive, and running against an established Democratic incumbent. But what Zohran had was something stronger than connections. He had conviction. He went door to door, talking with tenants, taxi workers, and shopkeepers. He listened. He empathized. He didn't promise miracles. He promised honesty. When Election Day arrived, the results stunned the political establishment. Zohran Mamdani won, powered by volunteers, grassroots donations, and thousands of working-class voters who finally felt seen. For many, it was more than just a local victory. It was a message. A new generation of leadership had arrived, one that believed in equality, representation, and compassion. As an assemblyman, Zohran's focus remained clear: help those who were unheard. He advocated for rent control, public housing reforms, and workers' rights. He stood with New York City taxi drivers, many of whom were drowning in debt due to unfair medallion loans. When others stayed silent, he stood beside them, in protests, in hunger strikes, under the cold city rain. He listened to their stories, stories of men who had driven for decades, who had lost their savings, their peace, and sometimes even their lives. Zohran's voice became a symbol of persistence, measured, firm, and deeply human. But his ambitions went beyond one district or one issue. He wanted a city where no one had to fight alone, where justice wasn't a privilege, but a promise. By 2024, as New York faced new waves of economic struggle, housing crises, and growing distrust in government, people began asking a question that would change everything. What if Zohran Mamdani ran for mayor? The announcement came quietly, but its impact was thunderous. In early 2025, Zohran Mamdani declared his candidacy for mayor of New York City. His message was simple yet powerful. New York should work for everyone, not just the wealthy and well-connected. He spoke about housing, public transit, education, and climate, not as talking points, but as human needs. He didn't dress his campaign in slogans, he dressed it in truth. While other candidates relied on large donors, Zohran built a movement. Volunteers flooded the streets of Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. They knocked on doors. They held neighborhood meetings in mosques, churches, parks, and cafes. It was a campaign of hope and of hard work. Critics called him too idealistic. Supporters called him authentic, and that difference became his strength. His campaign didn't look like traditional politics. It looked like New York itself. Black, brown, white, immigrant, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, united by a shared dream of fairness. When the debates arrived, Zohran didn't shout, he reasoned. He didn't attack, he explained. He reminded voters that politics was not a performance, but a responsibility. And slowly, people began to listen. When the 2025 New York mayoral race began, few experts predicted Zohran Mamdani's victory. He was an outsider, young, Muslim, and openly progressive. But he understood something that traditional politicians had forgotten. Change does not start in press conferences. It starts on doorsteps. While others campaigned through advertisements, Zohran campaigned through conversations. He spent hours in the streets of Queens, Harlem, and the Bronx, listening to teachers, street vendors, single mothers, and delivery workers. His campaign wasn't about what he wanted to say. It was about what people needed to be heard. And in that, New Yorkers saw something different. They saw authenticity. At a time when trust in government was collapsing, Zohran offered honesty. He admitted the system was broken. He admitted he couldn't fix everything overnight, but he promised to try, with them, not above them. His words carried both humility and hope. This city belongs to those who build it every day. The workers, the dreamers, the immigrants, the people who never stop believing that New York can be better. That message resonated because by 2025, the city was tired. Tired of inequality, tired of unaffordable housing, tired of leaders who talked about the poor but never stood beside them. Zohran's campaign was different, rooted in people, not power. Taxi drivers remembered him from their protests. Tenants remembered his help with eviction papers. Students remembered his speeches about justice. He wasn't a stranger to the people. He was one of them. When election night came, the city held its breath. As the votes were counted, the map of New York began to change color. Not red or blue, but human. District after district, from the Bronx to Brooklyn, turned toward Mamdani. And when the final numbers appeared, history was made. Zohran Mamdani had become the first Muslim mayor of New York City. Cheers filled the streets outside City Hall. From mosques to subway stations, from classrooms to cafes, people felt a rare sense of pride and possibility. It was more than an election. It was a reflection of a city finally ready to see itself in full. And so, on that night, as the final votes were counted, the city changed forever. Zohran Mamdani, the son of immigrants, the voice of the working class, the believer in fairness, had become the first Muslim mayor in the history of New York City. For many, it was not only a political victory, it was a cultural moment, a symbol of how far the city had come and how far it was willing to go for justice, representation, and hope. From the crowded streets of Queens to the steps of City Hall, his story reminded everyone that leadership can rise from anywhere, that compassion can be strength, and that even in a city of millions, one voice, honest and fearless, can still change history. This is not just the story of one man. It is the story of a city, reborn through courage, unity, and the belief that change begins with all of us.